Martha Stewart once dated Anthony Hopkins but broke it off with him after watching The Silence of the Lambs. She says she couldn't separate Hopkins from his cannibalistic character Hannibal Lecter. RFK's assassin Sirhan Sirhan is still alive today and has been denied parole 17 times. According to historians, we would have a lot more Egyptian mummies intact today if so many of them weren't eaten during the Victorian era. People used to believe that the ground-up corpses of ancient Egyptians could cure different ailments. Harvey Weinstein reportedly had gangrene around his private area, giving his shaft a Frankenstein look that appeared as if it was chopped off and sewn back on. His ghoulies were also removed during treatment of his gangrene, leading to several of his victims suspecting that he was intersex. When Roman Emperor Commodus was in power, he had his men gather all the dwarves and disabled people they could find around the city. They were brought to the Colosseum, where each of them was given a meat cleaver and forced to fight to the death. Right after purchasing some hot coffee from McDonald's in 2004, 79-year-old Stella Liebeck accidentally spilled it into her lap, causing horrific third-degree burns. The woman quickly went into shock and was hospitalized for 8 days while undergoing skin grafts. Since the burns were so bad, her lady parts had melted and fused to her legs. Stella suffered permanent disfigurement after the incident and was partially disabled for 2 years. She then sued McDonald's for making the coffee way too hot and was only seeking $20,000 to cover her medical bills. But McDonald's refused to settle with Stella as the media completely demonized her, calling her the poster child of frivolous lawsuits. However, people quickly changed their tune when photos of the horrific burns finally released. With one of the jurors being so traumatized, he forced his wife to quit drinking hot coffee. Stella ended up winning $2.9 million in damages from the lawsuit, but her life was never the same again. In 2016, Texas father Daniel Shaver was held up by police after he was seen pointing a pellet gun out of his hotel window. Several officers had rifles pointed at Schaefer in the hallway as he attempted to comply with them, but their commands were confusing and contradictory, especially since Shaver was drunk. For example, they told Shaver not to put his hands down for any reason before telling him to start crawling towards them. As Shaver was crawling and begging for his life, he reached back to pull his pants up and was killed instantly by Officer Philip Brailsford, who later claimed he thought Shaver was reaching for a weapon. Brailsford was charged with second-degree murder and found not guilty, since the full unedited footage wasn't released until hours after his acquittal. Brailsford was rehired by the department and reimbursed for all the medical expenses he paid while seeking treatment for the PTSD he claimed he acquired from the shooting. Because of this, Brailsford was medically retired and now collects a $2,500 pension every month. In 1998, Lenny Dieriksen was eating breakfast with his 19-year-old son when a stranger suddenly showed up at their Oklahoma farm. Lenny went out and spoke with the man for several minutes, before coming back inside and telling his son that the man wanted to look at one of his stud horses. But after leaving his home in the man's truck, Lenny never returned. He was apparently seen having lunch with the stranger at a local coffee shop a few hours later, but the trail went cold as the stud horse that Lenny mentioned was never visited that day. 6 months later, someone called 911 claiming he saw Lenny at a local bar, but he was gone before police could get there. The case remains unsolved to this day. In New Brunswick, Canada in 2013, 2 little boys were strangled to death by a 100-pound python while at a sleepover at their friend's house. The snake apparently snuck into the apartment through a vent connected to a pet shop below the boys' room. Experts claimed it's highly unlikely for a python to just go on a human killing spree, but the boys had gone to a petting zoo earlier in the day, so they may have smelled like food to the snake. The snake was euthanized, and the snake's owner was eventually found not guilty of negligent homicide. In 2013, well-respected meteorologist Tim Samaras became the first storm chaser killed by a tornado along with his son Paul and friend Carl. The Oklahoma tornado expanded from 1 mile to 2.6 miles in about 30 seconds and was the largest ever recorded. It suddenly took a sharp turn towards the group, leaving them screaming their last words over the radio, "We're gonna die." These were the final photos of extreme cave diver Dave Shaw just moments before his final dive into South Africa's Bushman's Hole. He blacked out at 872 feet while retrieving a fellow diver's body, and his helmet cam recorded his demise. Osama bin Laden's son Omar was severely beaten by his father for smiling too widely when he was a young boy. He trained in Al-Qaeda camps starting at 14 years old, but left the terrorist organization in 2000 since he didn't support the idea of killing innocent civilians. In 2006, Gail Laverne Grimes died in the hospital after surgeons spent 6 exhausting hours trying to separate her skin from a couch. The 500-pound woman had been sitting on her living room sofa for 6 years to the point where her skin had completely fused to the fabric. Rescue workers had to transport Gail in her couch using a trailer, and she ended up dying while still attached to it. According to his memoir, when Vice President J.D. Vance was 12 years old, his drug-addicted mother was once driving erratically and threatened to crash her car to kill them both. J.D. had no choice but to jump out of the speeding vehicle and run to a nearby house for help. He now refers to this event as a turning point in his life, since it prompted him to move in with his non-abusive grandmother and work towards a more stable life. In the year 2000, Mexican woman Ines Ramirez performed an hour-long C-section on herself after suffering 12 hours of constant pain. Using a large kitchen knife, she made a 7-inch vertical incision and pulled the baby boy out of her own uterus. Despite no prior medical training, both Ramirez and her baby miraculously survived. In 1996, 16-year-old Travis Lewis pleaded guilty to the murder of Sally McKay. While seeking closure, Sally's daughter Martha visited Travis several times in prison and eventually forgave him for killing her mother. When he was released on parole 23 years later, Martha allowed Travis to move in with her and gave him a job as groundskeeper of her estate. But when she realized the man was frequently stealing from her, Martha fired Travis and kicked him out. Soon afterwards, Travis broke into Martha's home and stabbed her to death before drowning in a nearby lake while running from police. This man died after making the dumbest mistake of his life while camping out in Alaska. In 1981, American wildlife photographer Carl McCunn hired a bush pilot to drop him off in the Alaskan wilderness. He planned on camping by himself for 5 months to take photographs of wildlife, but would soon realize he'd forgotten to arrange for a return flight. As the weather grew colder and his supplies began to dwindle, Carl soon realized that he may never return home. At one point after he lost all hope, Carl was seen by an Alaskan state trooper plane but was ignored because he raised his fist in celebration, and a raised fist is known to be a signal that everything's okay. Referring to this incident, Carl wrote in his journal, "It's certainly my fault I'm here now. Man, I can't believe it. I really feel like a klutz. Now I know why nobody's shown up since." Carl's campsite and corpse were found a few weeks later, along with his journal, which detailed his harrowing final months. In February of last year, famed adult star Emily Willis was left permanently disabled after a health crisis at the facility that was treating her ketamine addiction. She'd reportedly been clean for several days when her health began to rapidly decline, and the rehab center allegedly failed to provide her with the proper care. Willis was barely eating or drinking while suffering from severe headaches, anxiety, night terrors, and a UTI. She eventually suffered a heart attack and wasn't taken to the hospital quickly enough, forcing paramedics to perform CPR for more than 30 minutes, resulting in oxygen deprivation and irreversible brain damage. Willis entered a vegetative state for 2 months and now suffers from locked-in syndrome, a condition where the patient is conscious but can't move any muscles except those that control eye movements. Her family is now suing the rehab center, alleging medical negligence, inadequate supervision, and delayed emergency intervention, which they claim led to her awful permanent condition. The great Harry Houdini once escaped a prison cell while fully nude to show that he wasn't hiding anything to help his escape. But the guards who checked him apparently failed to fully inspect him, since Houdini was hiding the key up his chocolate starfish. Pubic wigs known as merkins were worn by prostitutes as early as the 15th century. The purpose for this accessory was that pubic hair was once considered popular and attractive, but sex workers often shaved their lower parts to avoid pubic lice, and these merkins also helped them cover up signs of STDs from their clients. Early colonizers of the United States commonly used corn cobs as toilet paper, since they were soft, plentiful, and the grooves were quite efficient at getting the job done. The Roman Emperor Elagabalus was only 14 when he assumed power and would often prostitute himself in taverns and brothels. He would frequently stand around naked while swinging his ding-a-ling and would offer vast sums of money to any doctor who could give him a vagina. He was killed at age 19, and his only positive legacy was the invention of the whoopee cushion, which he would use on unsuspecting dinner guests. In 2014, the incredibly preserved photograph of a young woman was found in the wreckage of the SS Central America, which sunk during a hurricane in 1857. The woman's identity is unknown, but the photo has been dubbed the Mona Lisa of the Deep. This is the earliest known depiction of Jesus Christ, scratched into a wall around 200 AD by someone who gave him a donkey's head to mock their friend for believing in Jesus. This is the only surviving handwriting of an ancient Roman emperor. It was written by Theodosius II around 430 AD and reads in Latin, "We desire that you be well." This is the only ancient Roman slave tag discovered that's still attached to its collar. Its inscription reads, "I have fled, seize me and return me to Zaninus for 1 gold coin." Here's a pictograph found at Barrier Canyon in the Utah desert depicting a humanoid with bug eyes and antennae. It's at least 2,500 years old. This is the only surviving example of a Ghiornia from the 15th century. This garb was a staple of Italian fashion in the 1400s, with this one belonging to Diego Cavaniglia, who died in 1481. Before it was found near his tomb in 2004, we only knew of gonorrheas through paintings and written records. In 2022, a badger burrowing into a cave in Spain accidentally dug up the largest collection of Roman coins ever found in the region. A local man was walking outside the cave and noticed nearly 100 coins randomly scattered on the ground next to a burrow. So he alerted archaeologists, who eventually found over 100 more ancient coins inside. Most of them date back to 300 AD and were likely hidden there by refugees over 1700 years ago. This apartment in Istanbul has renovations from 3 empires and 1 republic that ruled over the city at different times, all being built on top of each other. In 2016, Spanish man Juan Francisco was making some renovations in his home that resulted in a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. Behind the first wall he removed, he found the facade of a Renaissance-era hospital that was built in the 16th century. Juan immediately alerted archaeologists, who told him it once belonged to St. George's Hospital, a long-forgotten masterpiece by famed Spanish architect Andrés de Vandel-Vera. The structure is more than 30 feet tall and covers several floors of Juan's home. It's unclear as to why such an incredible work was hidden behind the wall of someone's home, but it had likely been that way for centuries. The beloved Bob Ross, who hosted the Joy of Painting in the 70s and 80s, was originally a master drill sergeant in the U.S. Air Force who screamed at men for a living. He was a strict, fearsome leader who became known as Bust 'em Up Bobby for his toughness towards subordinates. But Bob later said he didn't actually enjoy this aspect of his job, and promised that if he ever left the military, he would never shout again. This helped him develop the calm and gentle demeanor he became famous for on his painting show. After winning Academy Awards for Best Picture and Director for the movie Gandhi in 1982, Richard Attenborough openly claimed that Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial should have won instead. Spielberg ended up casting him as John Hammond in Jurassic Park to thank him. Hawaiian pizza was invented in Canada by a Greek immigrant who was inspired by Chinese food to put a South American ingredient on an Italian dish. Hawaiian pizza then went on to become the most popular pizza in Australia. Dolly Parton was born dirt poor in a 1-bedroom cabin in the mountains of Tennessee. The home had no electricity or running water, so Dolly and her 11 siblings struggled to stay clean. Their father was a sharecropper who couldn't read and struggled to make ends meet for his many children. As the family grew, the older kids took on more responsibilities, and Dolly, being the 4th of 12 children, had to look after her younger siblings, and would often entertain them with her guitar playing and singing before turning her talents into a career. Much of her music is inspired by her tough upbringing, and today she donates millions to help those in need. It's widely believed that Shrek was modeled after Maurice Tillett, aka the world's ugliest man. He was a celebrated pro wrestler in the 1940s who suffered from acromegaly, a condition that results in bone overgrowth and thickening. DreamWorks has declined to comment on whether or not this is true, despite the uncanny resemblance. Here's the Paramount Pictures logo on the day it was originally painted in 1965. DJ scratching was invented in 1975 when Grand Wizard Theodore would play his records too loudly, prompting his mother to constantly enter his room and scold him. This caused Theodore to hold the record still, accidentally moving it back and forth and liking the sound it made. When he was in high school, comedian Kevin James was a beast at wrestling. He was the top-ranked wrestler at his school, even ahead of his friend and future wrestling superstar Mick Foley, who was ranked second. The two would often face each other in practice as wrestling partners, and Kevin won most of the time. Foley says that when they were teenagers, James was the toughest kid in school, and one of the only kids he knew who could bench press 300 pounds. But Kevin's wrestling dream came to an end when he suffered a severe back injury, allowing Foley to take his spot as the top-ranked wrestler and launch his career of wrestling stardom. James then pushed for a football career until another injury took him out, so he instead settled for a life as a millionaire comedian. The first karaoke machine was built by Japanese nightclub musician Daisuke Inaoi in 1971, but he didn't patent his invention because he wanted to teach the world to sing. He earned nothing from the billion-dollar industry he created and says he has no regrets to this day. A Confederate soldier named John Pemberton was stabbed in the chest during the American Civil War. His efforts to control his resulting chronic pain led to a bad addiction to morphine. Attempting to break this habit, Pemberton started mixing various painkillers with carbonated water, and soon developed what would become the most well-known product in the world, Coca-Cola. The original recipe contained cocaine and alcohol and did nothing to curb Pemberton's morphine addiction. Chris Pratt dropped out of community college halfway through his first semester and ended up homeless in Maui. He was a daytime stripper and waited tables at the Bubba Gump Shrimp Factory, where he was eventually discovered by the daughter of Tommy Chong while serving her table. In 1950, an inventor was trying to make a waterproof sock to prevent trench foot in soldiers. Upon crafting a latex-coated sock and filling it with water to test for leaks, he found a rip and threw it on his table in frustration. Instantly pleased with the pop and splash, he decided to market water balloons to children. Jaywalking was invented by car companies in the early 1900s to shift the blame for accidents from motorists to pedestrians. The stethoscope was invented by Dr. Rene Laennec in 1816 because he wasn't comfortable placing his ear directly onto a woman's chest to listen to her heartbeat. In 1980, Star Wars was releasing a Christmas music album, but producers wanted a better singer for the track R2-D2 We Wish You a Merry Christmas. So they asked the 17-year-old kid who swept the floors at the studio, and he totally nailed it. His name was Jon Bon Jovi, and this marked the beginning of his professional singing career.